You are listening to Crazy HOA Moments. I learned what tow on site means in a snowstorm. The tow truck lights flashed across the snow and Karen yelled that my car was parked too close to a snow route marker and the HOA was towing it for winter operations. You can be mad, or you can be compliant. That is what Kimberly King shouted at me while I stood there in my blue puffer jacket with the hood up, a hand warmer packet going cold in my palm, watching the tow operator hook my sedan at 4 in the morning. I work early mornings as an auto mechanic, and I had parked in my own driveway the night before after scraping ice off the windshield with my garage door open. Apparently that counted as a snow route violation in Driftwood Crossing, Chattanooga, Tennessee, where the Homeowners Association treated winter rules like a religion. Kimberly stood under a streetlight with her flashlight shining at icy patches on the curb, her red belted wool coat cinched tight, her brown hair tucked behind her ears under the hood, and a stainless travel mug gripped in one gloved hand. She did not look cold. She looked smug. The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I. She said it like she was reading a script, her breath fogging in the air. I asked her what snow route marker she was talking about because I had never seen one near my driveway. She aimed the flashlight at a small reflective post half buried in a snowbank about 15 feet from my mailbox. That marker, she said. Your car was within 12 feet of it. Emergency winter operations require a 20-foot clearance. I told her my car had been in my driveway, not on the street. She shook her head and tapped her travel mug against the laminated policy sheet she had pulled from her coat pocket. The sheet had no readable text under the streetlight glare, but she held it out between us like a shield. Your driveway encroaches on the public easement during declared snow emergencies, she said. The board voted to expand enforcement this season. You were notified by email in November. I had not received any email. I told her that. She shrugged. Failure to update your contact information is not our problem. The tow fee is $200. The fine is $150. You can appeal at the next quarterly meeting in March. March was 3 months away. The tow operator finished securing the hook and climbed back into his cab. I asked Kimberly for a copy of the email or the meeting minutes. She sipped from her travel mug and said records requests go through the management company and require a processing fee. How much, I asked. She smiled. $50 per request plus copy fees. Your paperwork is cute, mine has a letterhead. That line hit me like a slap. I did not have $50 to throw at a records request, and I needed my car back that morning because my heating system was acting up and I had a service call scheduled for later that day. I could not afford to wait. I asked Kimberly who declared the snow emergency. She said the board president issued it by email at midnight. I asked if the board president had the authority to do that without a vote. She told me to read the bylaws and turned to walk back toward the mailbox cluster where two neighbors stood whispering with salt buckets in their hands, watching the whole scene. The tow truck pulled away with my car, red taillights disappearing into the pre-dawn dark. I stood there trying to process what had just happened. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my neighbor Eric, a former management company employee who had quit Driftwood Crossing after 6 months. He sent me a screenshot of the neighborhood group chat. Kimberly had posted a message at 3 in the morning painting me as a hazard during the storm, claiming my car blocked emergency access and required immediate removal. I walked back inside and checked my email. Nothing from the HOA since October. I searched my spam folder. Still nothing. I called the management company and got voicemail. I left a message asking for copies of the November email and the emergency declaration. Then I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and started digging. The Driftwood Crossing Homeowners Association had a reputation in Chattanooga for aggressive winter enforcement, but I had moved here in September, and the realtor never mentioned it. The HOA operated under a covenant that gave the board broad authority to levy fines and coordinate with vendors for code enforcement. Kimberly King held the title of Records Custodian, which meant she controlled access to meeting minutes, financial reports, and policy updates. I had a bad feeling about this. I texted Eric and asked if he knew anything about the tow company. He replied immediately. Same vendor every time. Kimberly has a cozy relationship with the owner. Check the call logs if you can get them. That was the first hint of the twist I would uncover later, but I did not understand it yet. I needed my car back. I called the tow yard and explained the situation. The dispatcher told me the release fee was $200 cash and I needed written authorization from the HOA to dispute the tow. I asked what kind of authorization. She said a signed letter from the board or the management company. I did not have that. I asked if I could pay the fee and dispute it later. She said yes, but the clock was ticking and storage fees started accruing after 24 hours. I grabbed my coat and drove my wife's car to the tow yard. The lot was surrounded by chain-link fence topped with barbed wire, and the office was a prefab building with a space heater glowing orange through the window. I paid the $200 and signed the release form. The clerk handed me my keys and told me the HOA had flagged my account for repeat violations. I asked what that meant. She said if I got towed again within 90 days, the fee would double. I asked who set that policy. She shrugged. That is between you and the HOA. I drove home and parked in the street 3 houses down, as far from the mystery snow route marker as I could manage. My doorbell camera had been capped by drifting snow overnight, and when I checked the app, the last clear frame was from 9 p.m. Kimberly called that convenient in the group chat an hour later, posting a screenshot of my dark camera feed with a comment about how I was avoiding accountability. I replied in the thread and said the snow had buried the lens, and I included a time-stamped photo of me brushing it off. She did not respond. 2 other neighbors liked my post. One of them was Eric. The other was a woman named Dana, who lived across the street and had been fighting the HOA over a shoveling fine since December. The heating system service call happened that afternoon. The technician found a cracked heat exchanger and said I needed a replacement part that would take 3 days to arrive. He also said the system was safe to run in the meantime as long as I kept the thermostat below 68. That was cold for January in Chattanooga, but I did not have a choice. I bundled up and kept the hood on my blue puffer jacket pulled tight. That night, I got an email from the management company. The subject line said Winter Compliance Notice. I opened it and found a PDF with no readable text when I zoomed in, but the summary at the top said I owed $150 for the snow route violation plus a $50 administrative fee for the appeal processing. The appeal hearing was scheduled for March 15th. I replied and said I never received the November notification, and I wanted proof of the email and the emergency declaration. The management company replied the next morning with a one-line message. Records requests require a $50 processing fee per document. Please submit payment to proceed. I felt my stomach drop. This was the scheme. Kimberly controlled the records, the management company backed her up, and anyone who wanted to fight a fine had to pay for the privilege of seeing the evidence. I called Eric and told him what was happening. He laughed, but it was not a happy sound. That is Kimberly's playbook, he said. She buries the email in spam or sends it to an old address, then charges you to prove she sent it. I fought her on 3 cases when I worked there. She won every time because people could not afford the fees. I asked Eric what I should do. He said I needed to file a formal records request under Tennessee law, which allowed homeowners to access HOA documents for a reasonable fee. $50 per document was not reasonable. He told me to send a certified letter to the management company and the board demanding copies of the November email, the emergency declaration, the board meeting minutes approving the winter policy, and the contract with the tow company. He also told me to cite the statute. I drafted the letter that night and mailed it the next morning. The certified receipt came back signed by Kimberly King. 3 days later, I got a response. The management company sent me a bill for $250 covering 5 documents at $50 each. I did not have $250. I called a lawyer and asked if the fee was legal. The lawyer said it was excessive and I could challenge it, but that would require filing a complaint and possibly going to court. The consultation alone cost me $100 I could not afford. I thanked him and hung up. I kept my plan quiet because the HOA depends on controlling the narrative. That was the tease. I had an idea forming, but I was not ready to show my hand yet. The next escalation came fast. Kimberly posted in the neighborhood group chat again, this time with a photo of my car parked on the street 3 houses down. The post said I was ignoring assigned parking rules and creating a safety hazard by forcing the snowplow to navigate around my vehicle. She tagged the board president and the compliance officer. Within an hour, I got a call from the compliance officer, a man named Richard who sounded bored and irritated. He told me I had 24 hours to move my car to my driveway or face another tow. I told him my driveway was the reason I got towed the first time. He said that was under appeal and I needed to comply with current policy until the appeal was resolved. I asked what current policy allowed me to do. He said park in the assigned guest lot on the north end of the neighborhood. The guest lot was a quarter-mile from my house. I told Richard I could not walk that far in the ice every morning at 4 a.m. to get to work. He said that was not his problem. The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I. He said it exactly the way Kimberly had said it, like they had rehearsed it. I hung up and called Eric. He told me to document everything and start building a timeline. He also told me to check the county property records for the snow route marker location. I did. The marker was placed on HOA common property, not a public easement. That meant the 20-foot clearance rule was made up. I printed the property map and highlighted the marker location. Then I took my phone outside and recorded a video walkthrough showing the marker, my driveway, and the distance between them. I measured it with a tape measure. 18 feet. Even if the clearance rule was real, I had not violated it. I uploaded the video to a private cloud folder and sent the link to Eric and Dana. Dana replied within minutes. She had been hit with the same fake clearance rule in December and paid the fine because she could not afford to fight it. She still had the notice. She forwarded it to me. The notice cited a different distance, 15 feet. The rule was changing depending on who Kimberly wanted to target. I spent the weekend gathering evidence. I pulled up the HOA bylaws and found the section on emergency declarations. The board president could issue a declaration, but it required a majority vote within 72 hours to remain in effect. I submitted a second records request asking for the vote tally in the meeting minutes. The management company replied with another bill. This time it was $300. I did not pay it. Instead, I filed a complaint with the Tennessee Real Estate Commission citing the excessive fees and the lack of transparency. The complaint went into a queue. I got an automated reply saying it could take 6 to 8 weeks to investigate. I did not have 6 to 8 weeks. My heating system was barely functional and my health had been fragile. The sleep disruption from 4 a.m. starts, and the constant stress was making it worse. I started waking up with chest pain and shortness of breath. I saw my doctor and he told me to reduce stress and get more sleep. I laughed. The doctor did not think it was funny. He wrote me a note recommending I avoid night shifts and extreme cold exposure. I brought the note to my boss and asked if I could switch to day shifts temporarily. My boss said no. We were short-staffed and I was the only mechanic qualified to handle the early fleet inspections. I was trapped. The HOA was escalating, my health was failing, and I had no way to fight back without money I did not have. Then Eric called me. He had been digging through his old files and found something. When he worked for the management company, he had access to the vendor contracts. He still had a copy of the tow company agreement on his personal laptop. He sent it to me. The contract included a clause that required the tow company to verify HOA authorization before every tow. The verification had to include a signed work order with the violation type, location, and board approval. I asked Eric if he thought Kimberly was bypassing that requirement. He said he knew she was. He had seen her call the tow company directly and give verbal authorization without paperwork. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA revenge content. That was the twist. Kimberly had a cozy relationship with the tow vendor and the call logs would prove it. I just needed to get my hands on those logs. I called the tow company and asked to speak to the owner. The dispatcher put me through. The owner was a man named Frank who sounded annoyed. I told him I had been towed under false pretenses and I wanted to see the authorization paperwork. He said the HOA provided verbal authorization and that was sufficient. I told him the contract required written work orders. He went quiet. Then he said he would look into it and call me back. He did not call me back. I waited 2 days and called again. This time, Frank sounded defensive. He said the contract was between his company and the HOA, not me, and he did not have to show me anything. I told him I was filing a complaint with the Tennessee Department of Commerce and Insurance and I would be requesting the call logs and work orders as part of the investigation. He hung up on me. I filed the complaint that afternoon. I also sent a copy of the tow contract to Dana and Eric and asked them to spread the word in the neighborhood. Within an hour, 3 other homeowners contacted me. They had all been towed under similar circumstances. None of them had seen written authorization. The next night, the compliance patrol showed up at my house. It was after 10 p.m. and I was in bed trying to sleep before my 4 a.m. shift. I heard boots crunching in the snow outside and saw flashlight beams sweeping across my windows. I got up and looked outside. Kimberly and Richard were standing in my driveway with a clipboard and a camera, taking photos of my car. I opened the door and asked what they were doing. Kimberly said they were conducting a routine compliance inspection. I told her it was 10 p.m. and I had to be up in 6 hours. She smiled and said the bylaws allowed inspections at any time. The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I. I asked to see the inspection authorization. She held up the clipboard, but I could not read the text in the dark. I asked her to email me a copy. She said I could request one through the management company for a processing fee. I told her to get off my property. She said the driveway was part of the common easement during snow emergencies, and she had every right to be there. I shut the door and called the police. The dispatcher said it was a civil matter, and they could not remove HOA representatives conducting authorized inspections. I asked what authorized meant. The dispatcher said if the HOA bylaws allowed it, it was authorized. I hung up and texted Eric. He told me to record everything and document the harassment. I could not sleep that night. The chest pain came back and I spent 2 hours sitting up in bed trying to breathe. The next morning, I called out sick from work. My boss was not happy, but he did not fire me. I spent the day drafting a formal complaint to the board. I included the property map, the video walkthrough, Dana's notice showing the inconsistent clearance rule, the tow contract, and a timeline of every interaction with Kimberly. I sent the complaint to the board president, the management company, and every board member I could find an email address for. I also sent a copy to the Tennessee Real Estate Commission as a supplement to my earlier complaint. The board president replied within an hour. The email was short. Your complaint has been received and will be reviewed at the next board meeting on February 10th. You are welcome to attend and present your case. Until then, all fines and fees remain in effect. I checked the calendar. February 10th was 3 weeks away. I replied and asked if the fines would be suspended pending the review. The board president said no. I asked if I could get copies of the documents I had requested. The board president said records requests go through the management company. I was back where I started. Eric called me that afternoon. He had been talking to his old contacts at the management company, and one of them had leaked something. The November email Kimberly claimed to have sent did not exist. The management company had no record of it in their outbound mail logs. The emergency declaration was real, but the board never voted to ratify it, which meant it expired after 72 hours. The winter parking policy Kimberly kept citing had never been formally adopted. It was a draft proposal that died in committee in October. Everything she had used to justify the tow and the fines was fake. I asked Eric how I could prove it. He said I needed the email chain from the management company admitting the notice date or rule citation was wrong. He told me to escalate to a regional supervisor and force a written correction. I called the management company and asked to speak to a supervisor. The receptionist transferred me to a voicemail. I left a message. 2 days later, I got a call back from a woman named Sandra who said she was the regional compliance director. I explained the situation and asked for confirmation that the November email did not exist. Sandra said she could not discuss specific resident files without authorization. I told her I was the resident and I was authorizing her to discuss my file. She said she needed written authorization. I asked her to email me the form. She said the form was available on the resident portal. I logged into the portal and could not find the form. I called Sandra back and told her. She said it was under the records request section. I checked. The records request section required a $50 deposit to access. I told Sandra that was illegal. She said it was company policy. I asked to speak to her supervisor. She said her supervisor was out of the office until March. I hung up and called the Tennessee Real Estate Commission again. The agent I spoke to said my complaint was still under review and they could not provide an update. I asked if there was an expedited process for urgent cases. The agent said no. I was running out of options. The February 10th board meeting was 2 weeks away, and I still did not have the evidence I needed. Then I got a break. Dana called me and said she had been contacted by a lawyer who was building a class action case against Driftwood Crossing for illegal fee practices. The lawyer wanted to talk to anyone who had been charged excessive records fees or towed without proper authorization. I called the lawyer immediately. His name was Martin, and he sounded sharp and aggressive. He told me he had 6 clients already and he was looking for more. He said the case was strong, but he needed documentation. I sent him everything I had. He called me back the next day and said he wanted to add me to the case. Martin also gave me a strategy. He told me to file a records request under the Tennessee Homeowners Association Act, which capped fees at 25 cents per page for paper copies and actual cost for electronic copies. If the management company refused or charged more, I could sue for statutory damages. I drafted the request and sent it certified mail to the management company, the board president, and Kimberly King. The request listed 8 specific documents: the November email, the emergency declaration, the board vote on the declaration, the winter parking policy, the tow contract, the vendor call logs, the board meeting minutes for October through January, and the financial report showing where the records fees were going. The certified receipts came back signed within a week. Then I got a response from the management company. The letter said my request was overly broad and would require extensive staff time to fulfill. They estimated the cost at $500. I forwarded the letter to Martin. He filed a motion in Chancery Court that afternoon. The motion asked the court to compel the HOA to produce the records at the statutory rate and to award me attorney fees and damages for the illegal fee scheme. The court scheduled a hearing for February 15th, 5 days after the board meeting. Kimberly found out about the lawsuit 3 days later. She called me directly, which surprised me because she had been communicating exclusively through the group chat and formal notices. Her voice was tight and angry. She said I was wasting everyone's time and money with frivolous legal action. I told her the fees were illegal and she knew it. She said the fees were approved by the board and the management company. I asked her to show me the board resolution approving the fees. She said it was in the meeting minutes. I told her to send me the meeting minutes. She said I had to pay for them. I told her that was the whole problem. She hung up. That night, Kimberly posted in the neighborhood group chat. The post said the HOA was being forced to spend thousands of dollars defending itself against a baseless lawsuit, and every homeowner would see an assessment increase to cover the legal costs. She blamed me by name and said I was putting my personal vendetta ahead of the community. The post got 20 reactions, most of them angry faces. 3 people defended me, including Eric and Dana. One of them was a man named Carl who said he had been hit with a bogus pool fence violation in the summer and paid $400 in fines and fees. He said he wished he had fought it. The group chat exploded. People started sharing their own stories of excessive fees, arbitrary fines, and selective enforcement. Someone said Kimberly had charged them $75 for a copy of the bylaws that were supposed to be free. Someone else said they had been threatened with a lien over a trash can placement issue that was never in the rules. By midnight, the thread had over 100 comments. Kimberly tried to shut it down by muting replies, but the damage was done. The board president posted a message the next morning saying the board took all complaints seriously and encouraged residents to bring concerns to the monthly meetings. No one believed him. The February 10th board meeting was held in the clubhouse at 7 p.m. I arrived at 6:45 with Eric and Dana. The parking lot was already full. Inside, the meeting room was packed with at least 50 residents, most of them standing because there were not enough chairs. Kimberly sat at the front table with the board president, Richard, and 2 other board members I did not recognize. She had her stainless travel mug in front of her and a stack of file folders. She did not look at me when I walked in. The board president called the meeting to order and went through the standard agenda items: financial report, landscape update, pool maintenance schedule. Then he got to new business. He said the board had received several complaints regarding records fees and enforcement procedures, and they were going to address those complaints tonight. He asked if anyone wanted to speak. I raised my hand. He called on me. I walked to the front and laid out my case. I showed the property map proving the snow route marker was on HOA property, not a public easement. I showed the video walkthrough with the tape measure proving I had not violated the clearance rule even if it was real. I showed Dana's notice with the inconsistent distance. I showed the tow contract proving Kimberly had bypassed the authorization requirement. Kimberly interrupted me. She said I was misrepresenting the facts and the board had full authority to enforce emergency measures. I asked her to show me the board vote ratifying the emergency declaration. She said the vote was in the January meeting minutes. I asked her to produce the minutes. She said they were not finalized yet. I asked when they would be finalized. She said March. I told the room that was convenient. The board president told me to stay on topic. I asked him if he had signed a work order authorizing the tow. He said he had given verbal approval to Kimberly and she had handled the rest. I asked if he had seen the contract requirement for written work orders. He said no. The room erupted. People started shouting questions at Kimberly and the board president. Someone asked how much the HOA had paid the tow company in the last year. Someone else asked why the records fees were so high. Carl stood up and demanded a refund for his pool fence fine. The board president banged the gavel and called for order. It took 5 minutes to calm everyone down. When the room was quiet, the board president said the board would review the enforcement procedures and report back at the March meeting. I said that was not good enough. I told him I had filed a lawsuit and the court had scheduled a hearing for February 15th. I told him the court was going to compel the HOA to produce the records at the statutory rate, and if the records showed what I thought they showed, the HOA was going to owe refunds and damages to a lot of people. Kimberly stood up. Her face was red and her hands were shaking. She said I was trying to destroy the HOA and bankrupt the community. She said the fees were necessary to cover administrative costs and maintain transparency. Someone in the back of the room laughed. Kimberly shouted over the noise. "Your paperwork is cute, mine has a letterhead." The room went silent. Eric stood up and said that line right there was the problem. He said Kimberly had been using the records fees to control who could challenge her, and the tow scheme was just another way to punish people who did not fall in line. He said he had worked for the management company, and he had seen her do it before. The board president tried to shut Eric down, but Dana stood up and backed him. She said she had paid over $600 in fines and fees in the last 6 months, and none of it was justified. She said the HOA was supposed to serve the residents, not extort them. More people stood up. The board president banged the gavel again, but no one was listening. Kimberly grabbed her travel mug and her file folders and walked out. Richard followed her. The board president adjourned the meeting and left through a side door. The rest of us stayed and talked for another hour. By the time I left, 15 people had given me their contact information and asked to join the lawsuit. The court hearing on February 15th was short. Martin presented the records request statute and the HOA's response demanding $500. The judge asked the HOA's lawyer to justify the fee. The lawyer said the request was overly broad and required extensive staff time. The judge asked how many pages the 8 documents would be. The lawyer said approximately 200 pages. The judge did the math. At 25 cents per page, that was $50. He asked why the HOA was charging $500. The lawyer said the fee included staff time to locate and review the documents. The judge said that was not allowed under the statute. He ordered the HOA to produce the documents within 10 days at the statutory rate and awarded me $250 in attorney fees. I got the documents on February 23rd. The package included everything I had requested except the vendor call logs. The management company said the call logs were proprietary business records and not subject to disclosure. Martin filed a motion to compel. While we waited for that hearing, I reviewed the documents I had received. The November email did not exist. The emergency declaration was real, but the board vote never happened. The winter parking policy was still a draft. The tow contract was exactly what Eric had sent me. The board meeting minutes for October through January showed no discussion of records fees, emergency declarations, or enforcement procedures. The financial report showed that the records fees were being deposited into a general account with no itemization. I made copies of everything and sent them to the 15 people who had joined the lawsuit. I also sent a packet to the Tennessee Real Estate Commission and the State Attorney General's office. Then I did something I had been planning for 2 weeks. I went to the tow yard and asked to speak to Frank. He was not happy to see me. I told him I had the contract and the court order, and I knew he had been taking verbal authorizations from Kimberly without verifying board approval. I told him the contract required written work orders and he was in breach. I told him the state was investigating and he was going to lose his license if he did not cooperate. Frank stared at me for a long time. Then he pulled out a file box and handed it to me. Inside were copies of every tow authorization from the last 2 years. Most of them were handwritten notes from Kimberly with no board signature. I took the box to Martin. He reviewed the authorizations and filed an amended complaint adding fraud and breach of fiduciary duty. The amended complaint named Kimberly individually and sought damages for every homeowner who had been towed or fined under her authority. The court scheduled a hearing for March 20th. In the meantime, I prepared for the final showdown. I knew Kimberly would not go down without a fight, and I was right. On March 10th, I got a letter from the HOA threatening to send my account to collections even though the fees were disputed and under appeal. The letter said I owed $550 in fines, fees, and interest, and if I did not pay within 10 days, the HOA would file a lien on my property. I forwarded the letter to Martin. He called the HOA's lawyer and told him the collection threat was illegal under the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act because the debt was disputed and under litigation. The lawyer backed down, but the damage was done. I got calls from 2 collection agencies in the next week. I sent them both copies of the litigation notice and they stopped calling. The March 20th hearing was the turning point. Martin presented the tow authorizations, the missing board votes, the fake winter policy, and the illegal records fees. He showed the court that Kimberly had been operating outside her authority for at least 2 years and the board had either ignored it or enabled it. He asked the court to void all fines and fees issued under Kimberly's authority, order the HOA to refund everyone who had paid, and remove Kimberly from her position as records custodian. The HOA's lawyer argued that Kimberly had acted in good faith and the board had ratified her actions retroactively. The judge asked when the board had ratified her actions. The lawyer said March 5th. The judge asked to see the meeting minutes. The lawyer said the minutes were not finalized yet. The judge was not amused. He said the HOA had a pattern of withholding documents and operating in secret, and he was going to put an end to it. He ordered the HOA to produce the March 5th meeting minutes within 48 hours, and to hold a special meeting within 2 weeks to vote on removing Kimberly and reforming the records fee policy. He also ordered the HOA to refund every records fee collected in the last 2 years and to void every fine issued under the fake winter parking policy. The ruling was everything I had hoped for, but the real payoff came later. The special meeting was held on April 3rd at the clubhouse. The parking lot was packed again, and this time the local news was there. A reporter had picked up the story after the court ruling, and the HOA scandal was getting attention. Inside, the room was standing room only. Kimberly was not at the front table. She was sitting in the back row with her arms crossed and her stainless travel mug on the floor next to her chair. The board president opened the meeting and said the board was voting on 2 resolutions, removing Kimberly King as records custodian and adopting a new records fee policy capped at the statutory rate. He called for a vote. The motion to remove Kimberly passed 5-0. The motion to adopt the new fee policy passed 5-0. Then came the funny karma beat. The board president said the board was also voting to require actual evidence before fines, and all future enforcement actions would require written authorization from the board president and documentation in the meeting minutes. He said the new policy was necessary to restore trust and transparency. Someone in the audience asked what would happen to the fines that had already been voided. The board president said the HOA would issue refunds within 60 days. Someone else asked what would happen to Kimberly. The board president said Kimberly's own selective enforcement gets documented in the minutes, and the board would be reviewing her actions for potential legal consequences. Kimberly stood up. She said the board was scapegoating her to avoid responsibility, and the board president had approved every action she had taken. The board president said that was not true, and the record would show it. Kimberly grabbed her travel mug and walked toward the door. As she passed my seat, she stopped and looked at me. The rules do not care about your excuses, and neither do I. That was the last time she said it. Someone in the crowd shouted, "Your paperwork is cute, mine has a letterhead," throwing her own line back at her. The room erupted in laughter. Kimberly's smug smile vanished when the room turned on her. She left without another word. The refund started arriving in May. I got a check for $550 covering the tow fee, the fines, and the records fees. Dana got $800. Carl got $400. The total refund amount was over $30,000 across 42 homeowners. The HOA also settled the class action lawsuit for $50,000, which covered attorney fees and damages. Kimberly resigned from the board in June and moved out of Driftwood Crossing in August. The tow company lost its contract with the HOA, and Frank's license was suspended for 6 months after the state investigation found multiple violations. The final showdown happened at the shared mailbox cluster in late March, right after the special meeting. I was checking my mail when Kimberly pulled up in her car. She got out and walked over to me. She said I had destroyed her reputation and cost her everything. I told her she had done that to herself. She said I had no idea what it took to run an HOA and keep people in line. I told her that was the problem. She was not supposed to keep people in line. She was supposed to serve the community. She said the community did not deserve her service. I told her the community agreed. She started to say something else, but Eric and Dana walked up with salt buckets in their hands. They had been shoveling the mailbox area and saw the whole thing. Eric told Kimberly to leave me alone. Kimberly said she had every right to be there. Dana said not anymore. The board had revoked Kimberly's access to common areas pending the investigation. Kimberly looked at the three of us, then got back in her car and drove away. That was the last time I saw her. The outcome was exactly what I had fought for. The HOA refunded the snow-related fines, voided the ledger entries, and issued a written correction to all residents. The new board adopted transparent policies, capped records fees at the statutory rate, and required written authorization for all enforcement actions. The neighborhood group chat became a place for actual community discussion instead of Kimberly's enforcement theater. My heating system got repaired, my health improved, and I switched to day shifts at work. Looking back, the whole thing was absurd. A fake snow route marker, a records custodian with a god complex, and a tow scheme that unraveled because I refused to pay $50 for an email that never existed. But that is how these things work. The HOA depends on people being too tired, too broke, or too scared to fight back. I was all three, but I fought anyway. I kept my plan quiet because the HOA depends on controlling the narrative. When I finally showed the tow yard the paperwork and they refused to keep cooperating, the whole house of cards collapsed. If you are in an HOA fight, document everything. Get allies. Know the law. Do not let them bury you in fees and paperwork. And if someone like Kimberly tells you the rules do not care about your excuses, remind them that the rules do not care about selective enforcement either. I will catch you in the next upload.